All right. Jane and I are actually indebted to all historians, journalists and photographers, both present and past, who endeavored to preserve the past for all of us. Consequently, our new book's first chapter, if you have it or haven't seen it, is preserving our past, and it's a tribute to those people, journalists, photographers, and historians, for what they have done for us. We're especially indebted to the County Historical Society at McClurg in Westfield, Michelle Henry, who is an outstanding, absolutely outstanding county historian, and then all the individual historians, as Mary Jane and all of the others in all these communities. And Jane and I are thrilled to be part of what we call the continuum of preservationists, and in that role, we seek to honor our own families from Chautauqua County and who are also deeply rooted in the county. And now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Jane. Many of you know these things. You could probably just say what I'm saying, but I assure you, you'll learn some new things. Jane was born in England. She moved to DeWittville in 1952 with her mother and stepfather, Ford Cadwell. She's a graduate of Mayville High School and attended Fredonia State and JCC. She has devoted herself to photography both as a vocation and an avocation. Losing both parents at an early age taught her the power of the camera to record and hold moments in time. She's an illustrator, a photojournalist, a portrait photographer who has attained distinction as a chronicler of the Chautauqua Lake Region for nearly 4 decades. Among other organizations, Jane is a member of this illustrious Demus Point Historical Society, the Chautauqua County Historical Society, the Chautauqua Township Historical Society, which is up in Mayville at the depot. Devin Taylor is the historian. The Southwestern New York State Professional Photographers Association, and she's president of the DeWittville Cemetery Association.
My only claim to political fame.
And of course, you all know her as the proud owner and manager of Cadwell's Cheese House in DeWittville, currently celebrating its 86th year.
Thank you. Thank you. Now let me tell you a little about Kathleen. Following her 30-year career as an English and reading teacher in the Kenmore Town of Tonawanda school system, Kathleen married and moved to Chautauqua County in 1994, her family's birthplace. She managed the Chautauqua Literary and Scientific Circle at the institution for 14 years, worked on the staff at the Roger Torrey Peterson Institute in several capacities, and has volunteered at the Robert H. Jackson Center. She's a member fortnightly, DAR, of course the Demus Point Historical Society, a board trustee of the Chautauqua County Historical Society, and also serves on the Salvation Army Advisory Board in Jamestown. Now our partnership begins. As a photographer, I had always wanted to find a writing partner to work with me on a variety of projects. And after shooting Kathleen's wedding and becoming close friends, I suggested that we work together on a cheese cookbook, since customers had given recipes to Ford and me over several years. Well, Kathleen Zoom became frustrated with the lack of uniformity of measurements, abbreviations, poorly written, often illegible recipes. Moreover, we had no idea if they were even correct and if the finished dish would be edible. So that project was quickly abandoned. However, when I went to my place in Sarasota, Florida in 2000, I saw the Sarasota Bradenton Images of America book and thought this probably was a good outlet for our talents. And I must add that it was actually first brought to my attention by Dick Galloway, who was also in Sarasota then, and he pointed it out to me before I even got to Sarasota, so I was anxious to see these books. Although Kathleen had never written anything for publication before, she agreed to check Arcadia online, and that was our very first project together. At her husband's suggestion, as a businessman, we then formed a legal partnership, CC Enterprises, Chautauqua County, Currie, Crocker, which handles all our financial and legal transitions.
Okay, Arcadia Publishing. Each of our books was published by Arcadia, and they are not our own. We did not, when Dick wrote his book, he found a publisher. Ned spent 5 years writing this wonderful book and then had to find a publisher. But they wrote what they wanted to. We followed the dots, as you'll see. Arcadia Publishing is the American subsidiary of Tempest Publishing Group. It was founded in the United Kingdom in 1993. Since its Images of America series was launched in Dover, New Hampshire in 1994, well, those are all the places, it has become the largest publisher of regional history books in North America, with offices in Charleston, South Carolina, San Francisco, Chicago, and Portsmouth, New Hampshire. If you've done any traveling, you go into regional history in Barnes & Noble in any city, you will see thousands of these titles. There's thousands across the country, all the same format. Since Arcadia Publishing is our employer, it's important for you to understand the process of writing for their company. In order to maintain uniformity in books published throughout the United States, every Arcadia author receives a guidelines booklet and a layout planner, both of which must be adhered to in the multi-page contract that the authors must sign. And to be honest, when we first got this contract back in 2001, we were very nervous. It's about a 10-page contract, very nervous about it. But I happened to have taught in Kenmore, town of Tonawanda, and I called one of my former fellow teachers who I knew had published one on Kenmore and one on the town of Tonawanda. And he assured me that it was a legitimate company, and he also said that they enjoyed and benefited from the royalty checks. And he's connected with the Buffalo Historical Society. So after that testimonial, we were pretty good to go. Now, each of these new books, the other books were about places, and you know as much as Bemis Point as we do. Each of these books, Legendary Locals, is about people. Each book that this new series must contain between 140 and 230 images, between 12,000 and 30,000 words, and 130 to 230 different people and or groups, both historic and contemporary. But we believe that the advantages of working with Arcadia personnel far outweigh any constraints imposed by them. And of greatest importance to us is the fact that they fund the entire thing. Their marketing team is also sent to the area. It was sent to the Lenhart, it was sent to Skillman's, it was sent to the Lawson Boating Center. People came up from their sales department to try to get these books into different places. They're in places we didn't even ask for. Some pharmacies that we didn't even think about. So we think, what could be better than that? And so we've established a positive relationship with them over the past 13 years, and we have learned it's literally following the dots. And more importantly, we have learned how to, within that framework, be creative. By the way, most Arcadia authors might have 2 titles out. We're an anomaly. We have 5. But we got into it. We just kept going. And we have people like Mary Jane who are right there, to help us. Chautauqua County is a wonderful small place with lots of great libraries and historic settings, repositories, and so how could you not do that? Our relationship has been mutually beneficial, and these are our sales figures, and I'm not telling you this to show that we're very wealthy. I'll explain it in a minute. In 2000, this is approximately the titles of the books that have sold, the amount of books that have been sold. In 2001, Chautauqua Institution was published. Over 7,500 copies have been sold. 2002, Chautauqua Lake Region, 6,200. Jamestown, 2 years later, 5,200. And 2006, Westfield, 2,200. And then this latest book, they published 1,800 and they've sold over 1,400 copies. So that's like 2,500 books over a 13-year period. We get $1 a book to split. So you get 2,500 divided by 2, divided by 13 years. Why do we do this? Because we like to. So this brand new series, Legendary Locals, is designed to include a variety of notable residents, this is their words, past and present, who run the gamut from politicians to high school coaches and athletes, from notorious personalities to beloved entertainers. But you know that word notorious has changed through the years. Any English teachers, that's not what they really mean. Their images and stories will document the unique contributions residents have made that shape each community today. The series is designed to reveal the face of pioneering citizens who have built and shaped communities large and small across the United States.
For me, and I'm going to tell you that we could have taken the easy path by focusing on just one place. For example, legendary locals of Jamestown, or of Bemis, or of Mayville, or even Cherry Creek for that matter. But since our passion is for the Chautauqua Lake Region, we decided to concentrate on the 13 lakeside communities that currently have or once had post offices, because the majority were originally named for the site's founders. Following Chapter 1, Preserving Our Past, we proceed clockwise to cover Mayville, Point Chautauqua, DeWittville, Maple Springs, Bemis Point, Greenhurst, Fluvanna, Jamestown, Celeron, Lakewood, Asheville, Stowe, and the Chautauqua Institution. Population inevitably impacted the length of the chapter, so small neighboring communities were combined to provide a balance. Yet each contains a brief introduction to acknowledge the site's original settlers, their families, and their early occupations. We've discovered that each one of the 13 is unique, depending on its physical location, topography, and more importantly, its particular settlers. We needed to select a cross-section of historic and contemporary individuals to represent each place. Since our goal is always to provide the reader with something new and of interest through fresh images and captions, we included obvious individuals who made an impact, but also some ordinary residents who contributions may have been just a small but significant to their neighbors. And we thought it would be interesting to inform readers of the generational families who have maintained a presence in their communities and who continue to follow in their ancestors' footsteps. In order to do that, we knew that we had to conduct personal interviews, a new venture for us. Say among those, say the Stowe family, Farding, Galbato, Calamucci, Davidsons, Barone, Francina families.
Okay, so we've gathered our images and information. Now, let's use Bemis Point as an example of the way we developed a chapter. Because of its expansive bay and easy access on the lake, Bemis became a resort community early on. Its early residents capitalized on its natural beauty by developing businesses that attracted visitors. Who were they, and what were the businesses? We here all know those answers. Among them were hotel proprietors, boat livery owners, and fishing guides. Of special interest to us is the fact that their progeny continued to foster the family endeavors. For example, the torch was passed from Dr. J.J. Lenhart and his wife Dora to Charlotte and her husband George Anson Johnston, to George and John Johnston Sr. and his wife Jane, to Bebe, John, and Debbie, and now a fifth generation who's right here in the room is being groomed. We also have from Albertus W. Rappel and his wife Valona to George Rappel and his wife Elizabeth. Similarly, the Norton and the Lawson, Mr. David Lawson's back there, the Lawson families carried on their family's tradition regarding lake activities. Another mainstay of the adjacent properties was the agriculture industry, represented by the Cheneys and the Shepherdsons, among others. And we received quite an education, believe me, sitting with John, Betty Lou, and Annabelle at their kitchen table, and we were most grateful to be able to do so. So the above families are included in this volume, along with hundreds of other individuals who contributed to their communities. As appointed family historians, Rosemary Rappel and I have leafed together through our grandmother's priceless scrapbooks, and via photographs and letters, Bibi and Debbie have memories galore of Dora and Charlotte. And this chapter gave me the opportunity to share with readers our own grandmothers, all of us ladies here, our own grandmothers' concern for the betterment of Chautauqua Lake and the improvements in the village of Bemis Point, because they were leaders in the Bemis Point Ladies Civic Club, which was extremely active around 1913. How do I know that? Because my grandmother, Mattie Sullivan, had all those clippings in her scrapbook. And as we got more and more involved in the information and image gathering, we were amazed at the convoluted way in which information and images were obtained. For example, we tried to zero in on the person who built that castle-like building that's the War Vets over in Fluvanna on the other side of the lake. We led a merry chase, but we led a successful chase. We started with Russ Serto. Many of you know Russ Serto, who has lived in Fluvanna forever. Then we went to the manager of the War Vets, knocked on the door. We went to my friend Susan Fowler, who lives in Foxburg, PA. I met her at Chautauqua, but we know that there's a connection there. We went to the Foxburg town librarian, eventually to her son, who is the sexton of the cemetery in Foxburg, PA, where Malin Martin, who owned all this property in Fluvanna, the old Temperance Hotel, his nephew is buried in Foxburg, PA. So we have lots and lots of information, but the pictures of Malin Martin, who was the developer of the War Vets area, were ancient. They were from newspapers that Arcadia would not accept, you know, the quality of the papers themselves. So we went into the War Vets. We didn't know them. We'd go knocking on the door. And Jane was allowed to take a photo of the building in the building. So we don't have Malin Martin, but we know an awful lot about him. And then another Fluvanna phenomenon was this maze. We went to Fluvanna Library, and you might know her, Mary Jane. We went to Christine Anderson, who's a really wonderful lady. She referred us to Dorothy Johnson McCall because I said, where did all these pictures come in Fluvanna? Well, they're all scenes. We didn't want scenes this time. We wanted people. She said, oh, well, Dorothy Johnson McCall on Bentley has those. So we called her. We go over there. We talk to Alan Peterson at Peterson Farms. He leads us to his daughter, Kim Peterson Bentley, and her friend, Carol Shepard Fox. And then we go back to Betty McCusker, who I first found through Jim McCusker at the pub. They all have roots over in Fluvanna, but because of this circuitous way, we were able to restore the Strunk family Bible from the McCusker extended clan back to the people who it belonged to. So unexpected images and text came from several individuals, including Jamestown native Judy Gregory. You might have seen some of her artwork at JCC. She's a visual artist, a young gal at Chautauqua. And she insisted that her father be in the book. So we go, who's your father? She said Stanley Olson, who started the photography department at the Post-Journal. And she said, we'd rather have have him in there, not me. So we have them both. And then he, in turn, mentored Richard Hallberg, another photographer, who we also have in the book. So who knew? But that's how all these things went. Now, Jane's going to explain to you how she and I complement each other, complement with an E, complement each other when we work.
I'm very visual, and Kathleen sees the written word, and she sees the text. And the story here I want to tell you is this: she had this poster on her table and hadn't been framed yet, but I got a flyer in the mail, and I looked at it, and I called her up, and I said, oh my gosh, Kathleen, look at this beautiful picture you have on the poster. She said, what are you talking about? I said, the artist is painting your dog.
Those are my dogs.
She had not even
My
seen
husband had hired
the
this
image,
man to
but
paint
had
the
seen
dogs.
the way it was laid out and the text, and that's the way we work.
I was looking at words. I never saw the dogs. So that's, you know that, Jenny, right now. my first task was to research the history of each of the individual communities. Now, 13 of them. We could have, as we said, just done Jamestown or Bemis or whatever, but we thought we would stretch ourselves, and boy, did we ever. So we wanted to determine the founding families, their reasons for settling at that particular site on the lake, their early occupations, and what was unique about their choice of home. You know, what did they have in common with their lakeside neighbors? I knew I could pretty much skip Jamestown, Mayville, Bemis, the institution in Point Chautauqua, because I've done that research in previous books. But I still had my hands full. What do we know about, Fluvanna or Stowe or Asheville or a lot of these places? Over the years, I've amassed a pretty complete collection of Chautauqua County history books, pamphlets, atlases, etc., to use as source material. My library began when I attended the auction of county historian Elizabeth Crocker when I first moved here. No relation. And several of you might have been at that one too. My goal then and ever since is just, my objective is not to get pristine copies of these books. I don't care about that. I just want to have them so I can research in my house at my leisure. So once Jane had amassed a suitable number of images based on what I found, my second task was then to take those people and learn all I could about them. How did they fit into the framework of the community, or how did their presence affect the Lake region in general?
Now, I needed to find the most appropriate and interesting photographs of people in those 13 communities. And we were advised that our choice not be based on popularity, nor should the book resemble old-fashioned high school annuals with pages full of headshots. I firmly believe that an image needs to say something to the viewer. For example, I needed to choose between a beautiful studio portrait of Russ Dietrich or one in which he is hanging out of the driver's side of the Babe Ruth's Pierce Arrow used during the first Babe Ruth World Series in Jamestown. And since that image also included two of the boys, the uniformed Jamestown baseball players, it was obviously worth 1,000 words. So my decision was an easy one. Now at this point, Kathleen and I had spent much of our time in area historical societies and libraries delving into their collections, and we were thrilled that our first two sources, the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation and the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame, were especially generous. Randy Sweeney, June Dietrich, Randy Anderson couldn't have been more helpful and supportive of our project. Our favorite sources of images and text, however, are family photo albums and scrapbooks, and correspondences that have been generously shared with us in many homes. For example, we certainly never expected to see, let alone have a chance to borrow a photograph of young Ebba and Arthur Goranson with their parents, Niles and Julia. But Dorothy Johnson McCall was kind enough to lend that to us from her personal collection, although we had gone to her home in search of former Fluvanna residents. With family roots in Point Chautauqua and Maple Springs, and as a 60-year resident of DeWittville, I was assigned to select the individuals for the chapter who I felt we wanted to include. And while searching for photos that tell a story, I came across one that became an instant favorite of mine. It's a 1942 image of Mayville's fountainette that lent itself to the story of 3 generations of the Webb family, and of course their expanding enterprises over the years. And the photograph I'm referring to is the front of the fountainette, and there is a little boy, probably 4, maybe not even that, and he is looking at these pictures in the window, and they are all the photographs of the servicemen and probably women who are in World War II. And the mother is leaning over, and you can just imagine her saying, "Come on, honey, come on." And he's saying, "No, I want to look at the soldiers." And to me, it could have been interpreted as a Norman Rockwell painting, on a cover of 1942. So anyway, similarly, I've documented the history of my family, and both of my great-grandfathers, that would be Orlando Carpenter and Charles Cadwell, and then great-grandfather Ward Cadwell, and as well as my dad, or my stepfather, Ford Cadwell, they were all Chautauqua County cheesemakers. And I am continuing that, but not making the cheese. I tell everyone I sold the cow. Limiting and eliminating images for this book, as with our previous ones, was often very painful for me. While staring at them
Interminably.
Thank you. On the monitor screen, I became emotionally attached to the subjects and sincerely regretted having to delete some of my very favorites due to this limited space. And the same for Kathleen. And we acknowledge that far more than nearly 200 individuals featured in this small volume deserve similar public recognition. Perhaps some of you might like to do a follow-up. Volume 2, there's plenty of room. I actually scanned over 500 images for this project, and I ended up using 184.
Wow.
Our first book, Chautauqua Institution, 1874. 1974 was created in my pre-computer and pre-scanning days. So back then, I had to find original photographs, photocopy them myself using black and white film, have the film processed, because I wasn't doing any processing and printing at home at that time, have them printed and sometimes reprinted, and then you remember film, don't you? Now we must find between 140 and 230 images, which I scan myself, meeting the following guidelines. They want the resolution set at to 300 dpi. The print size has to be 8 inches wide for one picture or 16 inches wide if you're using a double page spread. And the scans must be saved as uncompressed TIFFs.
Okay, we've done our parts. Now it's time to lay out, to combine the images and the information in 128 pages and try to make these chapters somewhat equitable in numbers. When we first started laying out, by the way, we started out going around the lake, clockwise, and we got to Chautauqua and we had 4 pages left. So we went back.
And had to
Took out.
delete again.
Took out.
Oh,
Okay. Finally, the two of us work side by side to determine placement of images that have been selected. This time, as in the past, Jane simply moves into my house, and we literally spend days at either my pool table and or dining room table,
and we're not playing pool.
aware that they would be covered until we were satisfied that we had done the very best we could. In this case, it took 3 missed deadlines and 2 complete years. Picture that. Jane's expertise as a wedding photographer then came into play as the images needed to relate to one another, not only on the page, but onto the facing page and throughout the entire chapter. Obviously, chronology factors into the placement, as does the number of words we wish to use for the image. Now you're talking about Arcadia. We have guidelines. If there are 2 images on the page, I'm limited by Arcadia to 70 words for each, and up to 350 words for one image. That is why Jane and Pam Arnold, who's behind the video camera there, and our guru, chose to superimpose the image of the actual sea lion onto that of the crew so that I could elaborate about both the people and the amazing vessel and the dedication, and use 350 words rather than 70 and 70. In order to introduce readers to as many worthy individuals as possible, we tried to only have 2 on a page to get as many people as we could. My main responsibility is to hone that text. I have researched absolutely everyone and thoroughly. I could write whatever about them. But my main responsibility is to hone the text to get the essence of each of the legends. Judge Geraci's lifetime of achievements and contributions in either 70 or 350 words, 70. Ron Graham, who did so much with Infinity and some of the sports programs in Jamestown, 70. Dr. Robert Burke, who gave me a resume like this, 70. Jim Roselli, 70. John O'Brien, gave him 70 from Camp Unyasa. Russ Dietrich, 70. In reality, for every individual in the book, I have amassed enough information to write an entire chapter or an entire book, but it ain't gonna happen. Another consideration with the layout is to place the individual in the appropriate chapter. For the most part, this is simple, but think about Betty and Reg Lene. They're connected with Jamestown, Chautauqua, and Lakewood. Where do their images belong? We got beautiful portraits from the Lene Foundation, beautiful portraits of each of them. But we went to the Jackson Center, and then we got a picture of Betty, who was very instrumental in the founding there. We got a picture of Betty standing next to John Q. Barrett, who's the scholar, or the Jackson scholar up there, holding a portrait of Robert Jackson. There you go. Then, for Reg Lene, what we decided to do was to use his portrait next to the Civic Center in a section on Jamestown because of his philanthropy with renovating the Civic Center. We also have the Lene Clock Tower in Lakewood, just the tower, but that's a tribute to the generosity of the village where they made their primary residence. And then last minute changes often occurred. Following the death this past year of noted local musician Stu Snyder and that of Sam Palladino, waited a suitable amount of time before calling the daughters and asking if we could possibly use those portraits that were in the obituary to put into our book, and they were delighted, absolutely delighted. And so we were warmly received, and therefore those appeared in our book as well.
I said again. In conclusion, we are very appreciative of all the press our book has received and gratified by such positive reaction. We had no idea that this book would be of greater interest than our others, but apparently that's the case. I think people just nosy. They want to know about people. And of course, the major criticism is that of omission, but that was to be expected. Some comments that were music to our ears included, "So different from your others, especially endlessly fascinating."
And that came from Norm Carlson.
Wow.
And we quoted him.
You told him you were going to quote
I
him,
told
too.
him.
This must have been a lot of work. Surprised it only took you 2 years. Great to learn about people whose names I've only seen on signs or buildings. So many memories in this little book, commented Nancy Swanson of Chautauqua Bookstore, surprised and delighted that her father is prominently featured in this book. We had no idea who she even meant, and was amazed to learn that her father was Art Thomas of Stowe, who lovingly wrote the fairy tale about Bemis Point Stowe Ferry just prior to his sudden death. And we interviewed her sister-in-law, who apparently had kept it a secret. So to you, all of you here tonight, and to our readers, we say thank you for your appreciation and appreciating the rich history of Chautauqua County. We encourage you to maintain your family histories, too, so that your children and grandchildren will have a good sense of who they are and where they came from.